whatever it is. There's a lot of different ways to get things to move inside Unity utilizing C# or Playmaker. And we're going to probably use one of the more intuitive methods to do this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up where we have two different waypoints to move back and forth between. Now, we talked last week a bit about this strategy of if we double click on an object, it frames our view. Or if we select an object as an example and tap the F key, as long as our mouse has focus over the scene view, if we tap the F key, it's the same as double clicking on the object, it'll frame the view, which means that the next object that we make is going to make it at the exact same coordinates as the position of the object. So my assumption is that this object is in the starting position. Okay, so I'm going to go to Game Objects 3D and I'm going to make a sphere. And the reason I'm making a sphere for now is because I have a visual object that I can see. Okay, so if I temporarily go to my moving platform and I hide that moving platform, I have this sphere that's acting as a visual waypoint where this object is going to move towards. So I'm going to take my sphere and I'm going to call this WP1, short for waypoint 1. Okay, now before I replicate this, ultimately I'll probably want to do this with an empty game object, but I like having something visual that we can look at, that we can see in space, that we can relate to as the destination for the object. One of the things that, because we're dealing with a physics-based environment, I definitely don't want any collider to interfere with anything. So on this sphere, on this waypoint, I'm going to deactivate the collider so there's no hope of my player interacting with it, or if I make something complicated on this platform, that it interferes with anything. It's one less thing to troubleshoot. So I can either deactivate the collider or I can remove it altogether just by removing the component. So it's just kind of a surefire way not to be hassled by it. So I'm going to duplicate this object. I'm going to select waypoint 1, I'm going to duplicate it, I'm going to change its name to waypoint 2. Now, just like I've moved everything else, because I'm working on a grid, last week we talked about snapping objects. This object is at the center, the absolute center of where that cube is. I had moved that into position based on snapping. I'm looking at, even though these numbers are a little off, it's all in a grid relative to each other. So when I move my second waypoint, I'm going to hold down the command key and make sure that I'm snapping, and I'm not too concerned about what the actual number is, but I've moved it into a position that I know is going to be within probably a meter or half a meter of operating properly with any grid. So anything that I build, I can always tweak this later, but that's my waypoint number 2. So I have 3 objects that are going to go into this rig. I have the moving platform and then the 2 destination objects.
Do we need to have the spheres in the end?
Well, they could be empty game objects if you want.
I mean, do they have to be physical? Do they have to be seeable when we're done with it?
I'm going to turn the mesh render off when I'm done, but it's a good idea to have something visible.
For now, at least, right?
Yeah. Typically, I do this with empty game objects, if that answers your question. So I'm going to go back to my moving platform, and I'm going to set up a very simple system where we take the object and move it towards these waypoints. So we can mock this up on the board, but from a state machine standpoint, what's our gut tell us? How many states do we need for this thing to function? So I'm at waypoint 1. My job now is to go to waypoint 2. I get to waypoint 2. What's my job now?
Go back to waypoint
Go back to waypoint 1. I get to waypoint 1. What's my job now?
Go back to waypoint 2.
Go back to waypoint 2. This is the basic kind of ping pong of the thing. How many states do I need?
2, 3.
2, maybe 3, depending on need at least 2, right? So I'm going to take the moving platform and I'm going to add a state machine. The first state, I'm going to say move to WP1. So we're moving to waypoint 1.
I thought we're in WP1.
Yeah, we are. So, we're building a routine that should function regardless of where we're at. I'm going to go to the transform category, and I'm going to utilize this move towards command.
How do you get
Double
an
click.
action browser?
Down in you could use the action button down here in the state machine. That's one way to get to it. So I'm moving towards. So the owner of the game object is the platform, and I'm doing a move towards. You can see there's a debug line that's being drawn. The reason it's drawing, well, let me ask you. Why is there a debug line being drawn? What might that suggest there?
Target position.
Target position. What's our target position?
0, 0, 0.
Right there. 0, 0, 0. That's the center of our universe. We don't want it to move there. What we want to do is we want to move towards an object, and we can link an object here as the destination. So, folks, this is definitely something we want to sharpen our pencils for. We want to at least look at the screen, pretend you're paying attention, because this is something that it's very straightforward. It is very procedural, and repeating this over and over. I will review it, but if we're at the end of class and we're still trying to figure out how to make a platform move from between waypoints, it's going to be a difficult day. So I've dragged waypoint 1 as the destination into the target object, okay? So the idea is that when we're in this state, our job is to move towards waypoint 1. When we get there, we can use this finished event to say move to the next thing. Now we're going to have a very simple loop. We determined that we have a state 1 loop, or we have a state 1, and we have a state 2. And we're going to loop for now back and forth between those two things. Because we have one state and we only have one method of exiting each of those states, we can build an event, a transition event, a simple one. I'll call it next. Now you'll notice that I used the events tab instead of going down here and choosing, new event. Either way, it doesn't matter. Just know what you're doing. I'm going to utilize this next event. I'm going to right click and add that next event as a transition. This all should be, old hat by now. Because I don't have a destination state, I have a choice. I can either right click and add a state, but I like this method of holding down the command key and dragging the transition, which will result in a state at the end of it, okay? I'm going to undo that though, because I'm going to save myself a little bit of work. I'm going to select waypoint 1. This is like 90% of what we need in order for waypoint 2 to work, right? I'm going to select this state. I'm going to Command C to copy, Command V to paste. Because I've copied a state that is the start state, we get prompted to say, when you paste this, do you want that thing to become the start state? No, I don't in this case. Or yes, it doesn't really matter. Okay? I'm going to rename this and say move to waypoint 2. I'm going to wire these together. And then I'm going to select waypoint 2 and just make sure that my target is pointing to the destination of waypoint 2. So I'm going to drag waypoint 2 in here. I'm going to hit the play button, and then we'll talk about what else is happening. What else is happening in here? So my camera jumps into my player, so I'm just going to leave into the scene view so I can see what's happening. Each one of these states, and I'll pause this temporarily. Each one of these states is moving towards a destination object. We have a finished distance in meters. That means when we get within 1 meter of our destination, it's considered finished, and therefore we go do the next thing. Okay? So we're utilizing this finished event. Now we don't want the finished distance to be 0. It'll mean it never gets there. It might feel a little illogical, but if you have it set to 0, it's just going to get stuck, and it's going to say, okay, I did what I'm supposed to do, but I'm never finished. We do have a max speed, and that, as you guessed it, is determining how fast we're moving.
Which is too fast for us.
Yeah, so what would you like it to be?
I don't know.
What should it be?
Half?
I like it. So, I'm going to go to waypoint 1, and I'm going to key in the value of 5. Man, this is so much work. Changing 2 variables on 2 states. I just kind of got carpal tunnel from doing that. But I reduced my speed, right? So I'm going to hit the play button, and now my speed's at half. I'll jump over to the scene view so I can see this. That looks pretty good. I'll toggle the play button, and maybe I want it 6.5. Well, what I'm going to do is rather than use max speed as a hard value here, might I use something instead of a static value? Might I use a variable value?
Could.
We could. Why not? Let's do it. So what I'm going to do, if I want this to be a variable, I'm going to hit this equal sign. I'm going to create a new variable. It does not need to be a global. In fact, we don't want it a global. We want it just to talk to, we want the owner to utilize this. I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call this my speed. And I'm going to go to the variables tab, which will allow me to select my speed and very easily select and create kind of the default value of that speed. I'm going to go to waypoint 2, which I have not yet converted to the variable. So I'm going to go to the equal sign, and I'm going to choose my speed. And so whenever I'm using variables, I want to flip on debug. So now I can see that my speed is 6. Because I have a variable, now the more complex my waypoints get, I only need to change it in one place, right? I don't have to change it, which with 2 states, it's not a big deal. What else does this imply? Not only can we change this in one place, it's not a fixed value, it's not a static value, therefore, what are the possibilities here?
Pick up an object that changes the speed.
We could pick up an object that changes the speed. Okay, imagine for a moment, I'm going to keep this up and running if this will work, and I'm going to bump this up to, oops, there we go. This is what we discover in playing our game. But if we pick up this object over here, maybe we set that to a more reasonable value. Let me pause this. It's switching too fast now. And it becomes much easier because we've just reduced that value of speed. Okay? You know, these are things that are all possibilities. I'm going to let this default back to
6.
the original. And I'm going to do one last thing, which is kind of this is all modular, meaning that we have a moving platform that's talking to 2 individual waypoints. And so we can do a lot of different things. If I decide that my waypoint is in the wrong position, all I have to do is move that waypoint. Right now, I've effectively changed the destination of that object. That's one thing. Guess I should really disable that. Okay, so now we have a different destination. The other thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to double click on my moving platform just to kind of recenter my view. And I'm going to make an empty game object, and that ensures that I'm in the same position as my platform. And I'm going to call this my moving platform rig or group. I like to sometimes use the term of rig. I'm going to take all 3 of these objects and drop it into here, right? So now I can take this whole group and move it wherever I want to. But more importantly, if I duplicate that whole group and I'll move it over here, these waypoints are unique to that group. So this rig knows that it should be looking at the contents. And so now we have a duplicate set of moving platforms just by duplicating it. Okay, and then of course we can kind of offset them. We can have them move at different speeds. We can reposition the waypoints at this point and do whatever it is that we decide to do. Somebody help me out and walk me through what I would need to do in order to make this a 3 waypoint system. Let's have it move up somewhere. I'm not looking for step by step, I'm just looking for general suggestions.
Just add another state, like add another waypoint.
Okay, so I'm gonna come over here, I'm gonna borrow one of my existing states. I made a strategic decision to use waypoint 2 instead of waypoint 1 because now I won't get scolded by Playmaker to say, do I want to set a start state? No, so I'm just saving myself a little bit of time. I'm taking this and modifying that to waypoint 3, which doesn't exist yet, but I'm gonna include that in the loop. Okay, now I'm gonna go find one of my waypoints, I'm gonna duplicate it, and I'll move it up. I'll call this waypoint 3 just to be consistent with my organizational strategy. I'll come over here and I will replace the target. And so now when I hit the play button, it should do exactly what we think. Now, maybe I have a little bit of a glitch. Maybe I wanted to return back to waypoint 2 so it kind of does this L shape.
Then
So-
you can change it where you put waypoint 3 go make it go to waypoint 2 and then make waypoint 2 go back to waypoint 1.
Okay. So I'm gonna toggle the play button. I'm gonna go to I don't need another waypoint. All I really need is this state again. So I'm gonna copy and paste. I technically don't need to change anything but wire this back through. And it's just that simple, right? So now, because I can follow logic through here, that one was moving to waypoint 2. Okay, so we can scale that very easily. Not to mention, we have a local variable that's driving the speed of this thing, so all we have to do is change it. Okay, so let's take a few minutes. I'm gonna stop this video. Let's give